Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. 2, because I'm a fan of punk music. And 3, it's just more fun, right? If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. Please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Rana Kaliouby, who is co-founder and CEO of Affectiva and an author of a new book, which we'll get into in a second. But Rana, hi, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Now, Rana, for the benefit of our listeners and readers and things, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and also about the work that you do?
Yes, so I grew up in the Middle East and found my way to, I studied computer science. I'm a machine learning scientist, did my PhD at Cambridge University, and then ended up at MIT doing research there before spinning out a company, Affectiva, which is on a mission to humanize technology. So I basically build artificial emotional intelligence and try to bring that into our devices and our technologies.
Perfect. Now, I mentioned that you kind of like before you were you just written this new book, and which is called Girl Decoded: My Quest to Make Technology Emotionally Intelligent and Change the Way We Interact Forever. Now, first of all, we had a bit of a chat off kind of off air, as it were, because this your book brought up so many memories for me, because we were trading stories about being in Cairo, because I spent a number of years in Cairo in the 90s. That's all super cool. But and also the book is a bit of like a memoir. But can you tell me about it, the book, and how it came about, and sort of who's it for, and what's its main sort of thesis, just to give us an overall view?
Yeah, so the book is a memoir. It's a juxtaposition of my personal journey, as well as the journey of building emotional intelligence into our devices, and kind of how I came about that, what inspired the idea, how do it takes the reader behind the scenes and kind of decomposes, like, what does it take to build emotional intelligence in AI?
Right.
And then I kind of spent some time exploring the applications and use cases of that technology, and of course the ethical and moral implications of it all.
Mm-hmm.
So the book is really, and in the process of doing all of that, I find that my own personal transformation and kind of journey of self-discovery is kind of the hardest part of all of this.
Yeah.
So I talk about that too.
Perfect. So what I wanted to do actually to give people a flavor of the book is I wanted to dig into a few areas, or just pick out a few kind of areas that I spotted in the book that gives people like a flavor, kind of like of what's kind of going on. And the first thing I wanted to start with is that early in the book, you talk about wanting to not build emotive computers, but to enable human beings to retain our humanity when we are in the cyber world, as it were, i.e. the quest to humanize technology before it dehumanizes us. And I was a bit like, when I read that, I was like, come on, kind of like, because that's kind of, it's a great quest, right? And it's right. Like, it's the quest that's in front of us. So kind of tell us about that.
Yeah, I had this realization early in my career that, machines are completely oblivious to our emotional and mental states. And I wanted to change that. I wanted to reimagine what an effective human machine interface would look like. But in doing so, I realized that, interestingly, a lot of our communication is mediated through technology.
Mm.
And because this technology is emotion blind, our communications tend to be emotion blind. Like, we miss out on all of the nonverbal signals that we would send and receive if we were face to face.
Right.
And so I wanted to fix that. I wanted to bring emotional intelligence into our digital human connections, which, of course, we're recording this right in the middle of a global pandemic, and
Sure.
it's even more important now, because a lot of how we're communicating now is virtual.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also the next thing that kind of that there seemed to be a moment in the book was that you said that you stumbled upon, or you were recommended, the book Affective Computing. So can you tell me about that and that moment, and why that sort of book, where it came from, and why that book is important to you?
Yeah, I had just graduated. This was 1998. I had just finished my undergraduate degree in computer science at the American University in Cairo.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew I wanted to do a master's, a master's thesis, and I was exploring research topics. And I was really drawn into, again, like, how does technology change or affect human connection?
Mm-hmm.
And I stumbled upon Affective Computing, ordered it on Amazon. It took 3 months to ship to Cairo. It got held in the Egyptian customs for a reason I still don't understand. But eventually I read the book, and the thesis in the book is that when you look at human intelligence, it's not just about your IQ, your EQ, your ability to tap into and read other people's emotional states and adapt in real time is really critical. And so Roz Picard, the author of this book, and she's an MIT professor, was positing that is the case for technology as well, especially technology that interfaces with people. And I read the book, and it totally resonated with me, and it changed the trajectory of my life. I pivoted to, that became my research topic. And I've been trying to crack the code.
Yeah.
Since then.
And then you go into the book, follows on from there, and it follows your journey kind of through your, your studies and stuff. But then it also tells the story about kind of how you were kind of like struggling a little bit with some of the research, but then there was this period where somebody suggested or mentioned autism, and how that kind of impacted your work. And the reason I highlight these sort of things is, like, what I think is fascinating is this quest, as you say, to understand kind of, or put emotion into AI. And it's like how you've kind of taken kind of like insights and clues that some of them have been conscious and some have been serendipitous. But the story about autism, I thought it was a good one. So tell me how that fits into your work.
Yeah, so I get to Cambridge University to start my PhD, and essentially my research proposal is to build a machine that can read and respond to people's facial expressions. Right? I'm very emotive, and I know that the face is a very important channel for communicating our mental and emotional states. And so I was giving this presentation. I had just arrived in Cambridge, and I was presenting to the computer science department there. And talking about how hard it is to do that, how hard it is to build an algorithm that can detect all of our, the wide range, the gamut of our expressions. And somebody in the audience at the end said, my brother has autism,
right,
and he really struggles with reading and responding to the face. In fact, he avoids the face altogether because it's just so overwhelming. And I remember at the time, this was in 2000, right? And coming from the Middle East, you don't really talk about autism and other kind of mental health. So I was like, autism, what? Like, can you spell it? And so I wrote it down. And as it turns out, Cambridge has one of the top autism research centers in the world. So I, called, emailed the director there, Simon Baron-Cohen, Sacha Baron-Cohen's cousin, I think, brother or cousin, I'm not sure. Yeah. And anyway, so I ended up collaborating with Simon's team. He had built a database for autistic kids that kind of archived all the emotions that we can express. And he was kind enough to share the data with me so I could train my algorithms with it.
Awesome. And then the next thing that kind of like they jumped on. Now this is a bit of the personal kind of like story, because actually, and this is the thing, is that the interesting thing about the book is it's a combination of a memoir, but also kind of like telling the story about how you've got to where you've got to in terms of the emotive AI. So if it's not too hard to tell me about it, can you tell me how about failing to read emotional cues ended your marriage, but also by recognizing this, it also inspired your research?
Yeah, I find it kind of really sad and ironic, but yeah, when I moved to Cambridge, my husband at the time had to stay in Cairo because he had a startup, and but he was very supportive of my moving to Cambridge to study, and so we had a 5-year long distance relationship. During that time, we had our first child, my daughter. Um, but then soon after that, when I went back to Egypt, and I was commuting back and forth between Cairo and Boston for MIT, but eventually our marriage fell apart, and there was this moment where he basically said, I'm done with this, and it was, I hadn't seen it coming. In retrospect, it was very obvious, but I realized that in the quest to build emotional intelligence into technology, I had totally missed. Like, I had missed all of these clues that my husband and my life partner was unhappy. And that just, that I think about that a lot, and I think it really affected, where you focus your energy, and you can't take these communications for granted, right? You can't assume that because you're very close to somebody, it's going to always be the same. You have to invest in the relationship and listen, right?
Yeah.
We were talking about that offline, like a lot of the time we're not really listening to not to what's being said. That's only 10% of how we communicate. 90% is nonverbal.
Sure.
And I think, as we like stare into our phones, and we don't look up and actually clue into these nonverbal signals, and they say a lot. It's like a parallel conversation.
Awesome. So let's fast forward, and now you're in Boston, and you are developing this idea called emotive AI. I mean, so what's that? So, I mean, it's only one word and, 2 capital letters, but it's like a big thing, I think. So can you explain to me what emotive AI is?
It is a big thing. So again, taking a look at the technology space, and particularly where everybody is focused in the space of artificial intelligence, a lot of the work is going towards the IQ of these AI systems, right? The cognitive intelligence, but nobody's really thinking about the EQ, the emotional intelligence. And because a lot of these technologies interface with humans on a day-to-day basis, they are taking on roles that were traditionally done by people, like, driving your car, or assisting with your healthcare, or, being a social companion at home, like conversational agents. Like, all of these things are very kind of plugged into and are becoming very mainstream in our day-to-day lives, but they're missing this emotional intelligence, this empathy. And so, I'm on this journey to kind of balance the equation, of course, IQ is important, but so is EQ. And I'm trying to make the case, but also build the underlying technology that's going to power that EQ for all of our, AI systems and technologies.
Yeah. And in doing that, you've set up this company called Affectiva, and it's which you are the CEO of. And at the core of the technology, or rather the manifestation of the technology, I guess, of the emotive AI, is facial recognition technology. If I'm right. So how is that actually can use? How does it work in practice? Can you give me a couple of examples of how you've kind of been able to use that, and sort of how it's impacted people's sort of experiences, as it were?
Yeah. So the technology, kind of in a simplified form, is essentially an algorithm that uses any camera on a device with your consent, and it will kind of detect your expressions in real time, and then it's able to take action based on that. So for example, one of the first products that we brought to market is a solution that helps content creators and marketers and advertisers understand the emotional engagement that consumers have with their content. So, and that product is deployed in 90 countries around the world. It's used by 25% of the Fortune Global 500 companies. We've just hit the mark where we've tested over 50,000 ads worldwide. And that's allowing us to just create all sorts of insights. So the idea is, as you're watching an ad, again, with your consent, we would ask for your permission to track your responses.
Right.
Moment by moment, like 15 or 30 times a second, we have a clue into how you're feeling. And then we aggregate all of that across everybody that's watched the ad, and we're able to show, where did people laugh, where did people roll their eyes, where did people smirk, or how expressive and emotive was this content. And again, marketers use it to make media spend decisions. They use it to edit the content. Sometimes they're A/B testing different versions of the content. So it's a very powerful tool, because before this technology, the way to do it was you just ask a survey at the end.
Yeah.
And surveys are still very important, but they tap into a different part of the brain, right? They're very cognitive, whereas this is the visceral subconscious reactions that people have.
Yeah.
And very powerful.
Because we're also not kind of very good at accurately describing or being honest with how we actually really feel as well.
Exactly. And sometimes it's an emotional journey too, like, right? It's sometimes I can't summarize it in one word, or like, on a scale from 1 to 5, like, rate your experience. Well, at the beginning it was really awesome, but in the middle it was like, man, and then at the end, it's a journey.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And how are you kind of like doing that? I mean, am I right in recalling that you, is some of the work based on Daniel Ekman's sort of spectrum of kind of emotions work, or is it like a different setup, or how does it work?
Yeah, you're referring to Paul Ekman's facial action coding system. So
sorry, not Daniel, Paul. Yes.
Oh yeah. So in the 70s, he and his team kind of published the facial action coding system, which is a code book for mapping all of our facial muscles, or each of our facial muscles, to a code. It takes about 100 hours to become a certified face reader. And then, it's very laborious and time intensive to code videos. So what we've done is we automate that. We use computer vision and machine learning to just automate the whole process.
Okay.
But then we have additional kind of machine learning models that then take these underlying building blocks and maps them to a mental or an emotional state. For example, are you paying attention? Are you, confused? Are you enjoying the content? Are you tired? Right? Like in some of our other markets, we are very interested in drowsiness detection for cars, for example.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's less. It's not just about advertising marketing. It's also about safety and kind of being a bit more proactive and preventative around kind of potential scenarios. So the interesting thing about all of this sort of stuff is, because I think everything about the on the forefront of kind of technology, and particularly around facial recognition technology, and also how we've kind of seen some of that technology applied in the public realm, never mind the private realm sort of thing. There's some big ethical kind of questions and dimensions, especially when you're kind of like, when you're using kind of, very sensitive data, i.e. people's faces and their emotions. And sometimes when it's, there will be situations where there's no option. I know in the book, you talk about a situation where you've had to take a bit of a principled and ethical stand to say no, and it's cost you, as it were. But there is that. I mean, it's how are you managing that ethical side of things? Because that's a big deal, and it's a big deal that wraps around all of AI and how we build models and what data we use and what assumptions go in, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, the type of data we're dealing with is extremely, extremely personal, and you could imagine all sorts of ways in which it can be misused and used to manipulate people. So when we first started the company and spun out of MIT, my co-founder Rosalind Picard, who's the author of Affective Computing, I ended up working with her, and
Right.
we started the company together. We acknowledged that there are so many applications of this technology, and we wanted to decide on where to draw the line. And to do that, we defined like a set of core guiding principles. So, for example, one is around data privacy, respecting people's privacy. The other is consenting people. So we absolutely never do anything without people's explicit consent.
Right.
And then there's things like, well, we also want people to get value in return for sharing this very personal data. So there has to be a balance, like this power asymmetry between who has the data and who's giving up the data, like that needs to be more balanced. So anyway, so that meant that there were some markets or industries that we would stay away from. And so surveillance and security was one example. And, sure enough, in 2011, which was a couple of years into the company's journey, we got approached by a potential investor. They wanted to give us $40 million of funding, which is a lot of money for a tiny startup.
Sure.
But the condition was that we would pivot to focusing on lie detection and security applications. And we just felt it was really not in line with why we started the company. And so we turned the money away, and we were able to raise money elsewhere. But we routinely get approached by such applications by governments, and we just politely decline. But we also evangelize at a kind of an industry level why this is dangerous territory. So we don't just say no and we say, okay, like go to our other competitors. We try to educate the ecosystem and highlight why this is dangerous.
I mean, do you think that there's going to be an increasing, well, no, I wouldn't say it's an increasing need. I would say, do you think there is a need for any company that's developing this type of technology, or any AI technology, and also any kind of companies that use AI technology, that they need to develop a set of principles or code of ethics when they're actually kind of using it to guide their use? Because otherwise we end up kind of we can slip into territory of like, oh, just we did it because we could, not because we decided to do it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe strongly that there needs to be thoughtful regulation around these technologies. So I think it would be unfortunate if we totally banned it, because there are so many transformative use cases, like we said, like around safety and mental health, like autism. And but I do think we need thoughtful regulation and very kind of clear guidelines on what is acceptable and what's not. I also think we need to think about the unintended consequences, right? Like, so a lot of technologies are built with the best intentions in mind, but get misused. And I think we need to, instead of just waiting until these happen, we need to be proactive and think about how it could be misused and try to put safeguards against these.
Yeah. So, I mean, thank you for that. I mean, hopefully that gives people a flavor of some of the stuff that you have, that you've gone through, and the things that you had to explore and research and wrestle with and everything else to get to where you've gotten to. And I think what's interesting is, like, it's a business book, but it feels like a personal story. And so it's like, it feels really easy to read. So, I mean, I enjoyed it. So thank you for that.
Thank you for reading.
If I was to say to you that, say there's some people that are listening to this, like executives or leaders that are listening and reading the highlights, and they want to, if you like, inject a bit of emotional intelligence, whether it's through AI or otherwise, into their service experience, and help it be better. I mean, what would be your best advice? I mean, like, what should they do first?
Yeah, I mean, the applications of emotion AI to customer experience and user experience is amazing, right? Because again, like the de facto way to capture this data is to ask people at the end of their experience, and it's really hard to summarize it into one scale or a few words.
Yeah.
What if you're able to quantify people's journey, you know, like say, I don't know, I am, it's kind of hard to think about that right now, but eventually at some point we will be checking back, you know, we'll be going to hotels and traveling again,
Sure.
hopefully. And if you're able to moment by moment capture this emotional journey, the ups and downs of it, are people frustrated? Are people enjoying it? Did you wow people, right? I mean, and that applies to retail experiences. It applies to online, you know, if you're buying products online, you're able to quantify, and it's a lead indicator, right? Because
Hmm.
you can, you know, by the time somebody abandons a shopping cart, it's too late. You can't intervene. But if earlier on you can see that they're really confused, they can't really find what they're looking for, that's an amazing moment to inject some help.
Mm.
Or if you can see that you've actually wowed the person, like that's interesting data points as well. So I think there's huge applications in the CX space for this technology, and it's very scalable, and it's also unobtrusive, which is cool, right? Because you can capture the data
Yeah.
as people go about their business.
And do you think you know, that I guess the kind of the thing I also think about the future of service and the future experience. I mean, there is a danger that it kind of like, and I know you're sort of like railing against this sort of thing because you're talking about humanizing technology before it dehumanizes us. But technology is this big wave, right? I mean, but we need to make sure that we maintain the human touch. I mean, so what do you think when you talk about the future of service and experience? What's the best thing that you think we can do to try and maintain that sort of like that the humanization, the human element of service and experience? Because you know, a lot of the investment right now, a lot of the focus right now is technology. But you're trying to rail against that, trying to get that balance kind of right. But so, how do we do that? How do we kind of like fight the good fight, as it were?
Yeah, to me, it's all about coming back to empathy.
Right.
Like, how can you use these data points to build more empathy into the customer experience journey,
Mm.
and use that data. I mean, it's almost an oxymoron, right? Because you're tapping into this very highly personal, sometimes very subjective data stream,
Yeah.
but you're quantifying it so it becomes like a data channel. And that's what I find most fascinating about this, because it's almost counterintuitive. But I guess I advocate for using this data in a way to to empathize with the customer and empathize with the user in a way that may not be possible otherwise. Because you can, again, it's the why. Like, why did people abandon the check-in experience at this point?
Right.
And these facial nonverbal signals can provide really powerful clues.
Perfect.
And you
I mean,
know, I think it's not just companies with their users. I think about myself as a business leader,
mm-hmm.
and again, having to interact with a geographically dispersed team virtually.
Mm-hmm.
How do I use this type of information to build more empathy? Like, I would love to know if my team's really stressed right now, and I
Right.
can ask them, but a lot of people may not share it. And of course, we wouldn't collect this data without people's consent anyways, but you know, it's all about bridging a communication gap.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so, do you think so what do you think the kind of the key challenges are to trying to in achieving kind of that? Is it that we just need to, if you like, kind of pay attention?
Yeah, I think paying attention, recognizing that it's not just about what people say, it's about this parallel universe of nonverbal communication, and
Right.
being, you know, clued into that. Whether you're on a Zoom call and the videos are turned on, and then you should not only listen but also watch, right, very intently, these, you know, how people are responding to the various conversations. Yes, and then approaches with empathy. I've been talking a lot about how we need empathetic leadership in general, but especially in these times. And I found when I start with empathy and I start with vulnerability, it's reciprocated, and it just changes the tone of the conversation, and it builds trust and loyalty. So Yeah, yay to empathy.
No, I think that's right. I mean, it's something we talked about before, where I talked about, we talked about it, we touched on this subject, and I talked about this idea of, you know, building the empathetic sort of musculature of an organization.
Yeah, I
Um,
love that. I
and
love that.
because it's like you have to think about it kind of holistically, otherwise we end up getting it becomes reductive again. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, we'll do an empathy exercise, or we'll do this, we'll do that, and it becomes a, you know, tick in a box or another skill to
Hmm.
think. But actually it's about thinking holistically about, you know, another layer that we almost need to kind of build in our organization, whether that is a human layer or technology layer or both. And because it manifests itself in empathy, but we have to do that at, you know, soup to nuts in many ways, you know,
Absolutely.
all the way through. But Rana, is there anything else that you'd like to add that we've missed out before I ask you a couple of final kind of fun questions?
I think we've covered a lot of ground. I mean, one area that maybe we didn't talk about is the applications of this around mental health and, you know, capturing stress and anxiety, which has relevance to, you know, a customer experience too. Like if you think about telehealth platforms and
Yeah.
me as a patient, you know, interacting with my doctor remotely, you know, that's a service, right?
Mm,
And being able to quantify the efficacy of that service, like, you know, is my doctor so doctors who are, as it turns out, doctors who are more empathetic or are perceived to be more empathetic are less likely to get sued. So how
yeah.
do you affect that feeling of empathy in a digital environment where, you know, it's hard to make face contact, it's hard to reciprocate nonverbal. So I think there's a lot of exciting, you know, yeah, there's a lot of exciting applications of this technology, especially with this global pandemic where we're spending a lot of our cycles
Yeah, no,
digital.
absolutely. I mean, it's not just about, I mean, the customer experience, as it were, extends to, you know, patient experience, citizen
Yeah,
experience, kind of the, you know, you can just keep going.
absolutely.
And so, yes, I think there's lots of applications and probably quite knotty conversations that need to be have around the right way to apply the technology to get to drive the right sort of outcomes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, so, as I say, a couple of final fun questions to finish with. As I was explaining before, I published a new book called Punk CX last year, and to end these interviews, what I've been doing is asking people two sort of almost association type questions. So, if I was to say to you, what one word do you think would describe a more punk approach to customer experience? What would you say?
Um, Video verbatims.
Okay, blimey,
So
explain.
okay. So that's kind of a newer way of capturing customer experiences, and it's
Oh, okay.
basically using video. And we're partnering with some of the leading video verbatim companies to be able to then quantify those. Right?
Right.
It's qualitative research, but it's like in these like bite-sized video verbatims that we can then like map out and say, oh, people were frustrated or people were really excited about this new concept or this new experience. um, Again, so it's the merging of the qualitative and the quantitative research worlds.
Nice. That's cool. And so, second question is, what company or brand do you think epitomizes a bit more of a punk approach to the experience that it's trying to deliver?
Okay, so the answer that comes to mind, and that might be like completely irrelevant,
No, no.
but
I mean,
for
it's
some
your answer.
reason,
That's fine.
for some reason, I'm thinking Taylor Swift.
Okay. That's cool. Taylor Swift is a brand.
Yeah, and the way she engages with her fans, she just makes it very, I mean, it feels like it's very personalized, it's very humanistic, and yeah, you feel special, right?
Right.
So I'm like, oh, I would like our customers to, you know, to feel like Taylor Swift fans. That's
Awesome.
great customer experience. Yeah.
No, no, that's kind of like, I mean, that's a great example because I've had lots of different examples kind of given to me, and that I've never had that one before. So that's super cool. Rana, thank you for that. I mean, just want to say, uh, congratulations on the book. It's both a fun and emotional kind of read, and interesting and educating kind of like read. It's particularly kind of like engaging for me because I spent a lot, as I say, I spent a lot of time in Cairo. But also congratulations on the work that you're doing with Affectiva, and also for just like for spending some time with us today and sharing some of your thoughts and some of your experience with us. That's been awesome.
Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. One final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.